No? Yes. Anyway, so welcome, and welcome to all the people who are online as well, because there are many more people out there than sitting here. But these 3 weeks have gone so quickly, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the last one. I don't want you to be the last one. Can we come back another time, please? But welcome, and welcome, Harvey. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Angela, very much indeed. Could I just check, can you all hear me reasonably well? Good, lovely. It's really great to see everybody. Oh, it would help if I switched it on. Yes. That's better, isn't it? Is that better? Yeah. Oh, good. I'm sure there's a message there. Yeah. We're all switched on. That's lovely. So thank you all again for coming, and for coming to a third session for all the sounds that we've been considering during these 3 weeks in Lent. Sounds of our own body, and then sounds of the world last week, and then today we're going to look at the soundtracks of the body of the church and the body of Christ. So our session today is going to be a little bit more practical, and I'm hoping we can find some benefit from that. Now, in the first week, just as a reminder, if I may remind you that I was very anxious and keen to tell you about how I have gone back to school to think again about God, because I've been back to school to learn the violin, and I brought my fiddle with me again tonight. And we were thinking together about how we are honest about the way we use our bodies. That was a very, very strong theme. And then last week, we were very concerned about the way in which sound and music is part and parcel of the whole universe in which we are set and in the world in which we live. And I, last week, was again encouraged to talk to you about some of my experiences with a musician, Eric Fenby, and the composer, Frederick Delius. Now, today, my experience is going to be focusing upon my passion for the unity of the church, the holding together of the body of Christ. I think some of you here will know that I have been spending all my ministry working very, very hard for the development and understanding of Christian unity and the importance of that long word, ecumenism. Now, why doesn't this work, do you think? It worked when I arrived, but it doesn't seem to be working now. Anyway, okay, if we can't get the screen, I want to try and enthuse with you about church unity. And I want us to be honest about unity. I'll just pause because it will help if I've got some pictures for us to look at. Here we go. Look. Good. So that has put up on the screen session 3 today at the bottom, my ecumenical passions. And I want to stress that this is a passion. But I'm also passionately disappointed in the ecumenical endeavor during my ministry. There'll be other ministers here who've attended countless meetings about church unity. And I think we are in a less united position in the British churches, in a less ecumenical position than we were 50 years ago. And it really is a sadness for me. And so I want to be honest tonight. If we're looking about the church's review in our circuit and any future thinking about our churches, whatever denomination they may be, I want to say very clearly that we must be more ecumenical. We must be more committed to the cause of unity. Now, I'm going to go on to our first theme for tonight. It is about understanding the body of Jesus, the Church of Christ. And I want to suggest to you a musical metaphor. I want to suggest to you that the church is a bit like an orchestra, a musical group. I envisage a large group of musicians. An orchestra for me is placed here because this is familiar to me. I've been able and privileged to play in orchestras for a number of years. I've usually played second fiddle. I don't know if anybody here plays second fiddle. And I wonder if there's something important about that. I wonder why I'm a little deprecating and feeling that I need to be near the back row of things. You know, when we're in church and we all creep in the back row. I remember Frank Thewlis, who I told you about last week, who often said he was always delighted when people used to come in and sit on the back row after the service had started and left before the end. At least they felt comfortable that they could come. And so I'm a second fiddler in the orchestra. But can you try to imagine the church, the Christian church, more as a body of musicians, an orchestra, a choir, a jazz band, a combo of all kinds of possibilities, a choir, rather than something set in stone or something that is of a more objective nature. When we began our ministry in Cheshire, I was very keen as a young probationer, wearing my clerical collar for the first time. I wanted to introduce myself to the local residents. So on my first afternoon of visiting, I went up to a door that I didn't know who lived there, and I knocked on the door and I said, "Good afternoon, I'm the new Methodist minister." And the response was, "Oh, I'm church," and slammed the door. So what was that understanding of church? Now here's the church I'm thinking about. It's very small to see, but here's an image of an orchestra, the standard Western symphony orchestra, showing you where the different instruments are located, the very grand conductor standing in the middle at the bottom there. And I'd like to suggest to you that the whole of the body of Jesus Christ is made up of an orchestral body. So that whatever denomination you are, you can say that you are in a different section of the orchestra. If you're Roman Catholic, you might be, I don't know what you can imagine, can't you? But we're all different because we all play in different tones and different sounds and different atmospheres that come from our instruments. And every part of Christ's church and all these plethora of denominations are different instruments of the orchestra. Now, I've put Honest to God picture up there again as a familiar reminder of what we're asking ourselves during these 3 weeks. We must be honest about the wealth of Christian traditions and celebrate our diversity and differences. That's a pretty bold statement, but I do think this is something we need to be honest about. I'm not convinced that the majority of our church-going population would immediately recognize their honesty of the need to celebrate our differences. I'm a Methodist, I want to celebrate the Roman Catholic Church. I want to celebrate the Pentecostal Church. I want to celebrate the evangelical, independent churches. I want to celebrate all manner of Christian bodies, all who put their faith in Jesus Christ. And that last bit there, this is an honest question for us. Do we love, admire, and trust those churches that are different from us? So it's a question. And I think for the future, if we're thinking about the review of our future circuit, we need to ask our people, do we love and admire and trust our place with those who are so different from our traditions? So, whatever our tradition might be, our tradition, whether it's Methodist, C of E, RC, part of the whole musical body, have I put there, the honest and urgent question for today and tomorrow, I believe, is this: why do we play our particular section of the orchestra, band and choir? In other words, why are we Anglicans? Why are we Methodists? Is there a way in which you can say, I'm a Methodist because? I'd like to feel that that's a question worth asking if we're going to be honest about the future of the church. And secondly, do we love those in another group enough to hear and listen to their music? When you play in an orchestra, if it's at the back of the second violin section, it's very, very important that you listen to the French horns, and you listen to the double basses, and you listen to the timpani section, and you have not only admiration, but you actually hear what they are playing. Do you see what I'm trying to drive at? I do believe that the nature of Christian unity needs to have a passion for relationships with the rest of our body, the church. I've just put in bracket there, a House of One in Berlin. I'm wondering if anyone has come across this. There is a building being constructed in Berlin that is housing a Christian church, a Jewish synagogue, and an Islamic mosque, all within one house. And I want to just talk that up and say that this is so vital for us to understand what our body is. Oh yeah, let me go back just to that bit again. And just to ask ourselves about our body as Christian people and think as carefully as we can about where we stand in the body. You know that St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, I think I had it up on one of the screens, chapter 12 of the first letter, which speaks of the body of Christ having many members, many parts. When we all rejoice, when one part rejoices, we all rejoice. When one part suffers, we all suffer. I want to say, when we are different from one another, then we all celebrate those differences. Donald Soper once said that the church is a fellowship of controversy. And I think what he means by that is that even if you disagree with a member of your body, you don't go and file for divorce. You can disagree, you can have violent disagreement, but you can still maintain your fellowship, your part of the body. Okay, so that's the first theme I wanted to stress. Here's theme 2 today about the body of the church. It's about the liturgy. It's about the worship that we express. And the first thing I want to put up is we've got a very odd understanding of the word liturgy, it seems to me. It's more common perhaps in the Anglican and Catholic churches and the Orthodox churches to use the word liturgy. You can speak to many free church people, and if you mention the word liturgy, they find that a very negative word. And we forget that its root is from two words, laity, all the people, and ergos, the work. So the liturgy of the church is the work of the people. And our work is to worship and praise God and share in his mission. And so, honest to God, let's rediscover the joy of being the people of God, and let's not use the word liturgy in such a limited way. And I put up here organism versus organization. It's another thing we need to be honest about. I had a teacher at college whose name was William Jardine Grisbrook. Great name. And he was an Orthodox layman, and he gave lectures in liturgy. And I don't remember anything else he said in his lectures, but I remember this. The church is an organism, not an organization. So I'm pleading today, everybody, when we think about the future of our circuit, the future of our parishes, the future of our churches, please remember that we're talking about the future of an organism, a living body. I think I probably spent more of my time in circuit ministry organizing things, having to face structures. We are besotted and bedeviled by safeguarding procedures in the life of the church. Organization. We are worried and sick to death about our future as an organization. I'm trying, I think, in these talks at this time to let us to get much more worried and more excited about being an organism. What's our future body really going to look like? And just as we said last week, let's get rid of the word music when we're thinking about our sound and music, and let's replace it with musicking so that it's an active word. Let's make our worship celebrating, something that is active, the whole people of God. And even the sermon, I'm not sure that the word sermon is a good word anymore. Could I dare say, let's get rid of the word sermon altogether and perform the gospel? Let's be honest then about our regular worship. Could it be an extravagant, wonderful, world-changing, dramatic performance of God's unbounded love song? What about that? Is it worth just pondering it for a moment? Could it be? And I know that I'm stressing music at the moment and sound. There are plenty of other aesthetic things as well, about senses of architecture, artwork, painting, poetry, many aesthetic things. But we are focusing, I'm very conscious that we're on music only. But that I'd like to really ask as a question for us. I thought I'd show you a picture of a famous opera house. This is a place called Bayreuth in Germany. It was an opera house built by Richard Wagner. And it was a very up-to-date thing in the 1870s. And he had this idea that an opera was the Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art. And it needs to be presented in such a way that the audience and the dramatic performers were all taking part in a great work of art. What's difficult to detect from that picture is that the orchestra, that I'm so concerned about as the body of the church, is completely hidden from view. It's underneath the stage. So that's a load of rubbish, really, isn't it? But think how that staging has influenced our theatrical presentation throughout the whole of the Western world. Our theatres, our concert halls, they're all designed with that knowledge of what Wagner was trying to do. But here's another space of performance, which is the inside of Paddy's Wigwam, which is the Roman Catholic Cathedral in Liverpool. And I don't know if it's easy for you to see, but the altar is in the center of the building. So all the performers of the orchestra, the whole gathering of the people of God are all sitting around the Lord's table. I think that's wonderful. And I think our architecture is very, very important. And can we be honest to God today and just ask ourselves in our churches, do we need to revisit our layout of our buildings a little bit? You see, this building, we're in a Wagner Gesand artwork here with the altar pressed up against the back of the wall there. Very nice. I'm delighted that the font is near the front. I've preached in many Methodist churches where the font is hidden right away, as far away as you can see, even out of sight. But the pulpit, the Lord's table, and the font should all be in a prominent position, it seems to me. But we'll come on to that. Now, what's the shape of our worship? And here I think if you got in front of you, you can see a Methodist worship book. If you want to look at this while I'm talking, you might find it interesting. If you can find the section of, let me give you the right page. I think it might be helpful. Just for our time, if you were to, if you wanted to have a look at this, I'm not saying we have to, but page 148, there's a form of worship here for this time of the year, for Lent and Passion Tide. And I'm going to just talk through the three movements of our worship. And you can see here the three parts. I'll just quickly say it if you are looking. You'll see the gathering of the people of God at the first part of page 148. That's the first part. The second part begins on page 151. At the top of the page, the ministry of the word in your book. And then the third part, page 153, which I've described as responding with our whole body, that's the Lord's Supper. So that's in this particular book of worship, that's the three parts I'm talking about today. Now, before we start, what goes on before we begin our worship? If we're in an Anglican church, very often the main act of worship is the celebration of the Eucharist. So the altar must be prepared. But the same applies to all traditions of the church. We need to prepare ourselves. It's a bit like, if you're going to have a friend or two round for an evening meal or for coffee, you need to prepare the room. And I'm wanting to make a plea tonight about thinking about how we prepare ourselves for worship. Do we prepare thoroughly as if something important is happening, or do we just go through the motions? Now, the gathering of the people. When I was playing second fiddle in the Royal Academy of Music Orchestra, we used to have a rehearsal every Monday afternoon at 2:00. And we were required to be in our places by 1:45, so that we could all tune up together. And I'll just give you a demonstration. I'm sure you know what that sounds like. this is a famous note. And all the string players would try and just make sure they were in tune and check it all out. And then the horn, I had a friend called John. I won't tell you his surname in case he's still around. But he was a horn player, and he would always show off during this time before the rehearsal was due to begin by making as much noise as he could. And we would all be playing, and I just used to sit there and think, oh, I'm fed up with everybody showing off. When we go to worship on a Sunday, what's really going on when people are gathering in the seats, in their pews? There's a lot of chatter in most churches these days. I mean, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, but I am asking this question: are we tuning up for the greatest moment of our lives? That's my question. Because when we're in an orchestra and we are getting ready for the leader of the orchestra to really get us in tune, we know that once the conductor starts the music, we are then going to be doing something very, very special. And I am pleading with the church at this moment to be more sensitive to the wonder and the joy. We talked about joy in our first session, the joy of being together as the body. And before we start, we have the call to worship. Oh, hang on, I need to go there. Look at that. Get ready. Once the conductor raises his baton, then everyone is brought together. When we gather in our churches for worship, we must be called together. The Lord is here, His Spirit is with us. This is our call. And we then start together. And here's the first movement. I mentioned in our worship book that we've got page 148, the gathering of the people of God. The first thing that we want to do once the baton is raised is to express our praise and our worship, to express the joy that I was speaking of 2 weeks ago, and the beauty and the adoration. And how best can you do that? I believe the best way to express our joy is to sing. And so I am a little bit critical of some churches, that have to have something going on during the first hymn in our worship. As though you have to have a procession or you have to start doing something. But we need to really put our whole body into our praise and worship that God is alive, that there is a joy in our belief. And what better way to do it is to sing a hymn of praise, or a song of praise, or some utterance of praise and thanksgiving and beauty. Then we come to the confession. And this is something, again, that I just have a feeling that our worship too often is so, just routine, to say the words of confession, to hear the absolution, as though this is just something we have to go through. If you hear some notes, I'll just play this for example. And if you sing this, la, la, can you feel the movement of the note going down to there? Can you feel that? La, la, or la, la. I wonder if you can feel that there is a move, the sound has to go. And I did a little experiment when I was in my first appointment. When I said some words from the pulpit of confession, I had a group of musicians playing a whole range of discords in the background. And I was hoping that would bring this sense of discomfort and a sense of being out of tune with ourselves that needed a resolution. And I do think that resolves it, doesn't it? Can I just play that again? Does that make sense? I hope it does. And because I think within the nature of music, there is this tension that needs to be released. And in our confession, we need to help people to actually feel that tension so that they can feel the release. Right, let's go on. Now, the second movement is the hearing of the ministry of the word. In our book, it's on page 151, the ministry of the word. Now, the word of God's love is recounted and sounded out. Now, this is something I feel quite passionately about. The way we read the Bible in church. There are some churches I've had the privilege of preaching in where the people who read are absolutely wonderful. But there are other places where it's a disaster, absolute disaster. It's as though they've not read it before. And just for a moment in our time tonight, I just want us to think carefully about how we read the Bible in the body of the church. We need some preparation for sure, but we need to be able to read with meaning. I don't know if you can see that. That's I just dropped something. I need to put my glasses on because the words are very small. But there are all kinds of things that go through our minds when we're listening to people reading the Bible. You can be aware of the sounds. You can be aware of the pitch, the level of how people read. You can be aware of the attributes of the sounds, loud, soft, exclamation, or hesitancy. You can also then move on to find that you can understand the shape of what's being said. And finally, I'm looking at the right-hand column of discipline. Finally, you can get some kind of meaning and purpose. So when you read the scriptures, I'm asking for a much more musical way of reading. I want it to flow and have pauses. Why can't this move? This magic button isn't working. Oh well. I want to see a slide that I have. Oh. Ah, that's it. Good. I put this from last week. When we read the Bible, be aware of the time, the tempo. Make sure that we're in tune with ourselves. Make sure that we can sing the melody of what we're speaking about and listen for all the inflections and the different ways of reading the scriptures. Do you see what I'm getting at? It's so important to read these things and to read the Bible in that way. I can't get this to move. I don't know if that little button does anything. No. Can we go to the next one, please? Okay. Yeah, we'll have that one. Here's a reminder of what we were doing last week with Eric Fenby. Do you remember? We heard about him. And Frederick Delius. And I want to just repeat again how much I've learnt about reading the Bible in the way you read a piece of music. I have in front of me here a manuscript score of Handel's Messiah. This is called the Urtext, the German original text of Handel's score to the musical oratorio Messiah. I had the great thrill of conducting this when I was 19, and this is the score I used. I was determined to get the original score, because there are so many different variations of the score. Even Mozart made an arrangement and put his own instrumental additions to it. And then there was a famous Victorian Englishman who added bits which were often used in the performance of Handel's Messiah. But I wanted the original, and I wanted to get back at it. And here I have another little book. This is the New Testament in Greek. And if I can get my next slide up. Glenn, why is it I can't move this thing? Maybe the batteries have run out. There you are, look. There's... Sorry?
There seems to be a delay.
A delay, all right, yes. But there's a bit of Handel's manuscript there, and there on the right is this New Testament. This belonged to a Methodist minister called Leslie Newman, and he gave me this years ago with his notes. And when I'm preaching, I'm always needing to be aware and remember that the scriptures were written in a completely different language to the one that we are familiar with. And this again affects the way we read the Bible. All right. There's a very long delay. It looks as though I'm going to shoot it. Can we move on, please, Glenn? Right. Good, thank you. So, when we're reading the scriptures, I think I'm trying to say to you, can we please read them in a musical mind, as though you've got to express it with the right pauses, the volume, the opportunity, as though you are giving a performance. I think there have been some famous actors who have read the Gospels and made recordings of their readings of it. We can learn an enormous amount from a dramatic performance of the scriptures. I quite unashamedly say we must perform the scriptures. So we all share in our response to the word. So we've begun our worship. We've heard the word that has been proclaimed after we've praised God. Now, we need to respond. Again, if you've still got your worship books in front of you, you'll notice that after the sermon, do you see it says sermon on page 151 in the middle of there? We then have affirmation of faith, the Apostles' Creed, as it happens. Now, I think for the future of the church, we've got to be very, very keen to remember that the creed is an expression of the whole body of the church. The actual propositions of the creed are not easy to believe anymore, in my view, to take them literally. But as John Robinson said, let's sing the creed. And there are plenty of ways of singing what we believe. And now I come to something that's terribly important to me, and that is the intercessions that we offer in our worship. If we understand them as a response to the reading and the preaching of the scriptures, how do we bring ourselves to our intercessions? And I want to try and express this. We talked last week and the week before about the way in which God's love breathes and moves through our body, and how the new world that God gives is a new world of love. I think we've got to re-establish our commitment that God is already at work in our painful world. God is working. God's mission to the world. God is there in the work of bringing love to the world. And I would even suggest that our understanding of God's love is so great that he is agonized by the world's needs and the world's problems, and that our intercessions are part of the agony that God is already expressing. Our intercessions so often are more like petitions, asking for things. Now we know that Jesus encourages us to ask for whatever you wish, and it will be given to you. Ask in the name of Christ. But we also know that Christ is the one, the body of Christ is the one who intercedes for us. And so I'm trying to get this idea of our prayers resonating with what God is already expressing in the world today. I hope that makes sense. There isn't time to go into great detail there, because the next thing I want to say is on the next screen. Can we try and get the next screen, please? I can't move the screen here at all, Glenn. Can you move it for us, please? Okay, well, we'll have to go on without them. So this is the intercessions, and I think it's an important aspect because we don't remember in our worship, in my view, that worship is interwoven with our mission. The mission of the church is so often seen as some sort of grand organizational scheme of the church, when in fact it is the mission of God and God's mission in which we are sharing. And the intercessions are the time when we most particularly articulate that involvement. And I want to have a word about notices. Time was when notices used to come at this sort of stage in our worship as part of our response. When the notices were given in the Church of Scotland, they call them the intimations. And that's the time when the needs of the community and the needs of the world are expressed in our notices. And I want to retrieve the glory of church notices, because they are part of the mission of God. Too often we start an act of worship with our notices that are often given by somebody who's not leading the worship, and then somebody says, we'll now start the worship. Oh, right. Now, next one. Where are we? Oh, okay. The next thing, after the intercessions, I just wanted, on our next screen, was wanting to just say something very quickly about hymns. We could spend the whole of one's life talking about hymns and the choice of hymns and the music that we sing. I'm not going to talk about that because that's for another time. What I'm trying to talk about is to say that our hymns and our music and the way we express our bodies is part and parcel of our response to what God has already done. I must lead us to the end of this session now by talking about the third part of our liturgy, and that is the communion service. In our worship book on page 153, it's called the Lord's Supper. And there are many churches, of course, that do not celebrate the Lord's Supper as the main part of the service. But for those who do, I want to just try. Oh, look, yes, good, thank you. How wonderful. Here we come to the third movement, responding with our whole body. In recent days, I've come to a much deeper awareness of what it means when the minister says, "This is my body given for you." And we've talked, not only last week, but I think also in our first week, about a little Greek word called kenosis. And I've tried to express that this is an understanding from the scriptures of how the body of Jesus is emptied of all except love. That God's love is emptied out through Christ's body being given to the world. A dramatic kenosis. And I think the communion service is the performance and the dramatic expression of Christ's emptying of himself. But there is a problem with this kenosis, in my view. It can feel as though I've got another screen. I hope we can get it. Yes, good, because this is what came to me only this afternoon, and I wanted to try and share it with you. Is Christ's body, when it's being emptied, like a container emptying out its contents? How do we understand the body of Jesus as a kenotic body? Or is the body of Jesus an instrument that's made of sounds and tones which pour themselves out by sounding into one another completely? I put this, and I'm trying to express this. I hope you might be able to grasp something of it. Musical sounds. When a musician really throws herself into the performance and the sounding of their musical performance, the musical sounds are passionately entered into each other. They are expressed not as a container empties its contents, but in a way that is fulfilled. And this is what I'm trying to get at, that Jesus' death and resurrection is a pouring out, a pouring of Christ himself with so much passion and so much commitment, like that poem by R.S. Thomas when the violinist is like Jesus on Calvary. I'm struggling, but I hope you might be getting a little bit of the gist. So that when we receive the body of Christ at the communion service, we are all participating in the pouring out of the love of God. It's an expression just as the way a passionate performance of music pours out the sound. That's what I'm really getting at. And so, dear friends, time is pressing on. And my last comment would want to just remind you of that great poem by R.S. Thomas. It must have been on Calvary. I could see the twitching of the fingers, could see the player so beautifully suffering for each of us upon his instrument. This is the body of Christ when we are given the bread and the wine with all the resonances of the scriptures and the people of God and the body of Christ. This is our celebration. And this is what we're doing when we worship. And then the last comment, and Christ's body is now refreshed and sustained as we celebrate having come together as a new being, a new creation, and we go on our way singing a new song in the world. That is a little summary of what fires me today, and my body and our body and the world's body. Thank you so much for being so patient.
Thank you, Harvey. I've learned so much over the last 3 weeks. Thank you very, very much. Anybody got any questions?
I have about 100 questions and comments. Harvey, if you look behind you at the floor of the apse, you'll see it's in sections. Mm-hmm. When we first refurbished this place, yes, the whole idea was that it should be flexible. Yes. And these sections came out and it could reconfigure. That's why it's chairs, not pews. That's why indeed the font and the table and the pulpit are movable. Inevitably, we got a bit lazy and said, it's too much fag to do all that. It'd be rather good, actually, to have another go at that. But when we first got it, it was like a new toy. And we experimented, did all sorts of things, stuff in the round. Maundy Thursday, for instance, in the round here. It was delightful. And similarly, well, almost similarly, when I was a chaplain at Canterbury Prison, we were a multi-faith chaplaincy. And somebody's law that just after the chapel had been refurbished or redecorated as a mainly Christian worship centre, the Home Office said, this is going to be an international prison now, and with international comes lots of Muslims, lots of Buddhists, slightly fewer Sikhs, slightly fewer Hindus. So the poor chapel orderly was forever changing the format. You might say that the Christians worshipped in that direction, the Muslims worshipped in that direction, the Buddhists had their shrine over there, and this poor, perspiring chapel orderly, bless his heart, worked his socks off every week. And it wasn't our space, it belonged to the nation, to the Home Office. But we learned so much about each other and from each other, not to be precious about our space. We learned something very profound there, which was absolutely super. Got lots of other questions, but that's enough for me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you. Thanks, Harvey. 2 things I wanted to say. First of all, again, you've sent my mind spinning in all directions with your musical metaphors. It's really been very wonderful to come these 3 weeks and just think in new ways I'm not. I know some of the terminology and so on, but I don't think in those terms very often. So thank you for that. The second thing was that while you were talking about the worship from the beginning, this powerful experience came into my mind that we had on Ash Wednesday. We decided we would go and get properly ashed in the local Anglican church, which we know is a high Anglican operation. There were about 15 people in the body of the church and about 15 up front in the choir and swinging the incense and with the priest and everything. So we were extremely obviously people who were not normally there. Nobody spoke to us before, during, or afterwards, apart from two interactions which were purely mechanical. One was that the priest had forgotten the sermon, forgotten one of the hymns, so the offertory hadn't been taken. So that was why, when I stumbled up to the front with my money, that was explained to me. Since we didn't know quite the way out, we went into the sort of hall area, and someone came up and said, "Oh, is the coffee then?" So I said, "Well, we don't know. We've never been here before." No further interaction. And the absence of any human personality, no, that's the wrong word, any human interaction, any human knowledge of each other, any human recognition of each other, didn't make it worthless. Because for me, I went there to get the ash, I got the ash, I went through the procedure, I heard all those words. They had a service book there that bore no relation to what was going on actually in the words that were said. Nobody explained that either. But it felt like what it must be for so many people if they ever were to come into a service of worship where it's all flowing pat, and those who are in it know what's going on, but those who are out aren't recognized or included in any way. Now, I talk about that at some length because it's kind of distanced by being another denomination. But I've had the same experience within the Methodist and Methodist URC fold, where there's no basis in the interaction between people for the things you've been talking about. And that's the biggest thing for me at the moment.
How to overcome that.
If it's worth trying to overcome.
May I share two anecdotes, as it were, that rise out of that? I've never been to Taizé, but I watched a video of it. And the point that really struck home for me is before the brothers come in and then they sort of kneel down the middle, whoever is in there is encouraged to learn the songs, whatever those songs may be, on the basis that when the brothers come and open it out, everybody knows what they're doing. And I found that very, very encouraging. For one of the, I guess because I have the privilege of being a preacher, you choose a hymn and you wonder, will people know it? Or else you choose it and then you're told, well, nobody will know this. So do you not use it? Is it the words? Is it the music? So I struggle a little bit with that. The other anecdote is, as I listened, you more or less were giving us a way in which Methodists do their worship, and we've got this liturgy, we've got it. When Val and I have the opportunity we can go to a Roman Catholic or an Anglican or a Pentecostal, and each of them have their own vibes, don't they? But one can sink into the vibes, and then there's an enjoyment in the vibes, because I'm not a so-called happy clappy, but I'm also not way up the candle. I'm a nonconformist kind of. So all those kind of things coming. How do we encourage the ecumenical spirit?
That's my question. I must admit, thinking about these things for these talks, it's made me have a fresh awareness of the importance of what we sometimes talk about, happy clappy worship. But it's wonderful if somebody is able, free to use their bodies with greater freedom. I think it's made me ask myself how I use my worship, how I use my body. And I think that there are lots of lessons here that are caught up with culture, with tradition, but also with familiarity with what we sing. And the whole discussion about how we help people to sing with their whole passion, and what we were talking about, the kenosis, letting the sounds really pour out and not be held back. Christ poured out his life. Somebody reminded me that, there's a record in the Passion of Jesus and on the cross, when he is quoted as saying some words from Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Which is the first line of a psalm. And I've never really thought about it properly until quite recently. It's, if Jesus did actually utter those words, it's quite likely that he would have sung them. And there is a thought that he is pouring out with his whole being, using his body, his voice, to express what was in him. That's what I think I was trying to wrestle with the kenosis. John.
Yeah. Well, can I just say thank you very, very much again for all the for all three sessions, Harvey, and indeed it has been mind-boggling and really stimulating thought. I was really encouraged that you saw, I felt, other faiths, or I felt this was coming through. You saw other faiths within the orchestra. And you after that came Paddy's Wigwam and the centre of the worship being in the centre. And I was kind of wondering if we are really looking at almost like a new Reformation that goes beyond Catholicism, beyond Protestantism, and into an understanding of God that has God at the centre, and all these wonderful traditions, the very best of them, fundamentally locked in love thy neighbour and caring for the community, are actually right at the centre of our understanding of the divine, and bringing along in with that the people who, and there are so many people I think out in the world today who are really concerned and want to do what's right, but they find the old traditions of the church perhaps unbelievable, not something that they feel comfortable with. And I think what you were beginning to open was an understanding of the divine that could unify faiths and people of no faith into with God at the center. And so I'm immensely encouraged. Thank you, Harvey.
Anyone else? Should we let him have another go?
I came out of theological college believing that the coming great church was just round the corner, as you did. I mean, I think clearly our paths have been parallel in many ways. And like you, much taken up with the ecumenical movement, like you, been in a shared church. Towards the end of my ministry, it was, as you say, in a way, a disappointment. So I moved into what I called, and this is what our friend's just been talking about, what I saw as the greater ecumenism. And towards the end of our time here, I think I was about a year off retirement, we began an interfaith because we realized there were some very interesting people in this town. And my daughter was married to a Muslim. And one of our tenants down here in the cafe was a Turkish Muslim, and got to know him quite well. So it was that sense of the greater ecumenism. And then I've just mentioned, being in the prison and that wonderful experience of a shared ministry to the prisoners there and the staff. So I've moved that way, Harvey. I haven't given up on, I must say, my enthusiasm for the unity of the church. I've said, well, if that's how people want it, they say, well, it's unity, not uniformity. But we could do much more together. And in fact, I wonder if, in economic terms, we may be forced together, because we're in such a crisis point. But I put my enthusiasm, I'm afraid, and energy more in what I call the wider ecumenism. Now I will shut up.
I have to confess that, the cynic in me tends to say we've been using that excuse of a wider ecumenism where we don't have to change our ways, that we've used that as a means of escaping the real issues that are involved, not just in bringing organizations together, but in actually developing faith within ourselves and within other people. I spent the first 12 years of my life in the Baptist church. And then for domestic reasons, then came into Methodism at 12 years of age, where I've been ever since. A little timetable, and I'll explain why. For the last 17 years, until we came here a year ago, for the last 17 years, we worshipped in an Anglican parish church, which, no, I won't express my cynicism, which was an Anglican Methodist LEP. Sometimes it was more or less Methodist and more or less and more Anglican, but that's besides the point, really. And I have to confess that, unlike Chris, when we came here a year ago, Chris fitted in like a well-oiled cog back into Methodism. It could have been worse. I have found it, in all honesty, I have found it more difficult to slot back into Methodism, because as bright and cheerful and as welcoming and as full of variety and lots of able people as this place is, I have found the Methodist experience rather monochrome by comparison with what I've known down the years. Having worked in an LEP in southwest London when you were in London southwest as well, having had those experiences along the way.
Yeah.
And then my mind goes back when I came out of college, and I don't know where I relate to you gentlemen, or you gentlemen, But I came out of college in 1970. I went in 66. When I went in, we were full of excitement as to all the possibilities that were being held out in front of us. When I came out into a circuit that shall remain nameless, I ended up in a circuit where generations of farming folk, living 3 maybe generations in one farmhouse, were torn apart because of the aftermath of the Anglican Methodist conversations. Which, why did they cause us a problem? Because they never came off. You know, they never happened. But such were the tensions involved with that, with people thinking this was going to happen. And we were going to have to think about bishops, for heaven's sake. And all this kind of stuff. It never happened. But the pain that was caused between not just members of Methodist churches, but between families within the Methodist Church was quite unbelievable. And now, one of the quirks of this stage in life is sometimes I ask Chris what started me in that sentence. I don't want to know. I don't want to know that really. But I think you'll get something of where I'm coming from, or where I have come from. And I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm any surer now, you know, 70, well, whatever number of years after ordination and all the rest of it, and apart from the beginning of my life. I'm not sure we're any clearer, certainly as institutions we're not. Because actually, when we hit on hard times, we all fall back on self-defense, as far as the institutions are concerned. I'm sure that is true. You know, we fall back on, we've got to defend our ways. The cathedral will be struggling to defend its ways, and so on.
I think certainly when we were confronted by the pandemic of COVID, there were lots of voices that were saying this is an opportunity for us not to go back to the way things were, but this is an opportunity to do something fresh. But it hasn't. But so I sense that we're resonating with. You've sensed that I've been expressing lots and lots of questions rather than giving any answers. But I think it still comes back about our honesty of how much we really are a body, a living organism, rather than propping up some sort of structure. And I think that's a crucial question for our circuit review.
So, thank you very much. I'm just been reflecting here. What have I learned? I've learned joy, and we are a church of joyful people. Don't get, glass half full. Don't be miserable. Then there was dissonance and coping with dissonance. And I spent a good part of last week singing that verse to myself from And Can It Be? That sort of was like a, yes, and it was going round her. And then tonight, I have this vision. I'm no biologist, but I'm thinking of an amoeba rather than an organisation, and a sort of single cell amoeba. And you're right, with the circuit meeting next week, and with all of this, we ought to be thinking about, and I hope we are thinking about, what are the needs of this area? Where God is leading us, and then the organisation will come second. So that's what we've really got to think about, is where are we going and why are we going there, and what have we got to do? But please come back and give us another lot of talks. I'm no musician. I come from a very musical family. I'm the one that's not the musician, but I've learnt so much. Thank you very, very much indeed.
thank you to Glenn as well. I'm sorry that we were a little bit caught in a hiatus now and again, Glenn, but thank you very much for keeping us up to speed with our IT.